Hi, everybody who is watching live on Facebook right now. We wanted to do a quick breakdown here on NewsNation of what is happening today at the Supreme Court as the court is getting ready in just about 15 minutes or so to take up the Mississippi abortion case. And that's why you're seeing this crowd around you. We'll get into the details of the case here in just a minute, but we kind of wanted to set the scene. We'll give everyone a chance to hop on Facebook, and this is obviously interactive. We got producers back in our studios in Chicago that are going to send me a couple of your questions. So if anyone who's watching wants to ask anything, we'll just ask that you keep it respectful. I'll try to address some of the questions that we have now throughout these next couple of minutes. I'll give you a lay of the land here. Basically, what we have been seeing all day today, even before the sun came up, is that we've had this big, large group of protesters on both sides of the abortion issue. And obviously, it's one that is incredibly emotional, incredibly personal. Not a surprise that outside of the Supreme Court here in Washington today, you have these big groups. The crowds have been growing since we got here at 6 a.m. or so. You've got a healthy group of both sides. There's a big pro-choice group here. I think the pro-life crowd sort of outnumbers the other side, not by much though. Again, there are large groups here. There is a barrier that you can't really see because, again, so many people here as these crowds have been swelling up. But there are kind of dueling demonstrations. We can hear people on the microphones, people on the loudspeakers. And again, this is an issue that really strikes a chord with a lot of people. It is very personal. We've talked to some folks here. We've also talked to some senators and members of Congress that are just on the other side of the street. They've come over to kind of share their pro-life or their pro-choice views. So that's kind of the scene, what we've been experiencing throughout the morning. I can tell you a lot of energy, a lot of enthusiasm on both sides of this thing. It has been relatively peaceful. There was one moment, I think, where you had one group from the pro-life side sort of head over into the pro-choice side, and things got a tiny bit contentious, but generally, as far as these protests go, and we know they can get contentious, this one has not been. It's been peaceful, and we hope it stays that way. Now, the Mississippi abortion case, what is this about? Well, in Mississippi, the law that was passed back in 2018 bans abortions after 15 weeks of pregnancy. It's generally accepted after the Supreme Court decision back in 1973, Roe v. Wade. For decades, Roe v. Wade has dictated that no state is allowed to make a law that infringes on a woman's right to an abortion or bans an abortion before about 23, 24 weeks. They call that period viability. That is when a fetus can survive outside of the womb. So no bans before then. Clearly, this Mississippi law is a direct violation and a challenge to Roe v. Wade. Now, that's the case that the Supreme Court's taking up right now, and that is why the stakes are so high. There have been a number of cases in the past that have challenged Roe versus Wade, but none this direct. And so you've got a pro-life group here that is, I think, more hopeful than what we've seen in the past because this law directly challenges Roe, and you got the numbers on your side. On the Supreme Court right now, there is a 6-3 conservative majority. Doesn't exactly mean that the conservative side is going to win out ultimately, but there is a 6-3 majority. And so I think what I've heard from people anecdotally walking around talking to folks, they're a bit more confident now than they have been. Likewise, on the other side of this rally, on the pro-choice side, I've talked to some folks who feel a little bit more concerned because they truly feel that Roe versus Wade and the woman's right to an abortion is not only under attack, but they think it is likely that at least gets cut into because of this conservative majority. Now, the court could rule a couple of different ways, and we can get into that in a minute. I want to see if we have some questions here that we can take maybe first. One being, why is the Supreme Court hearing this case specifically? It's a good question because the Supreme Court decides itself what cases to take and what cases they're going to leave alone. And there are, again, a lot of different laws around the country in the past year or so that have been passed that do infringe on abortion rights when we talk about that Roe versus Wade protection. The fact that this one was chosen is maybe an indication, at least again, according to some of these pro-life folks, on what the court may rule or that the court may change or at least into Roe versus Wade. But the reason the Supreme Court is taking up this case is because they chose it specifically to take this case up. There is one other abortion case that came out of Texas that also cuts a right to an abortion after 6 weeks. It's much more drastic than this Mississippi law, and experts say that that one may be thrown out for a couple of different reasons. This one is, frankly, the more legitimate case, and that's why, again, you got a lot of observers really keen on what the court decides with this case. Next question is just a timeline. When is a decision going to be made? So today we're not going to get a decision. What we're going to have today at 10 o'clock is the beginning of the oral arguments. Both sides will present their case before the Supreme Court. You're going to hear the justices question each side. You're going to hear the justices press each side on making their case as to why this 15-week abortion ban in Mississippi is legitimate, or, on the other side, why this is a direct violation of Roe versus Wade. So we're not going to get a decision for a matter of weeks. It could be even a matter of months. The Supreme Court takes their time to consider each one of these cases. The arguments that you're going to hear today that start at 10 a.m. probably are going to last a few hours. So if you want to tune in, you want to listen to that, you can hear all of it in just a matter of a few hours, but it's going to take a little while before we ultimately get a decision. I should say, on that Texas abortion case that was argued a month or so ago, that decision could come down any day now, relatively soon. So we're waiting to see kind of what happens there. Okay, another question. If Roe versus Wade is overturned, what happens next? That is a good question, and it is certainly a possibility. If Roe versus Wade is completely overturned, that doesn't mean that all abortion is illegal nationwide. What that would mean, if hypothetically Roe is overturned, is that each state would be allowed to make its own laws. If it's entirely overturned, you could see a scenario where states like Texas, states like Mississippi, more conservative states, could pass laws that do ban abortions. But that doesn't mean that New York or California or some of the other more progressive states would make laws that would ban abortion. In fact, you would likely see those states commit to keeping the existing abortion laws that they have now. So again, important to understand that overturning Roe doesn't ban abortions nationwide. What it does is it allows the states the authority to choose for themselves what their abortion laws state by state would be. So the crowd out here, question, how is the crowd out here? Again, I can tell you, we've been out here since, before 6 a.m. It has been growing steadily. The numbers have gotten larger as we have continued to stay out here. It is vocal. It is energetic. There is a lot of passion. You see the signs. You can see the people who are here chanting, singing. Clearly, this is an emotional issue that strikes a chord with a lot of people, but it has been respectful. We haven't seen violence. We haven't seen a lot of even back and forth in terms of rhetoric that has been offensive, that has been aggressive from one side or the other. And so you like to see that. Everyone has a First Amendment right to exercise, and certainly that's what we're seeing here today. We would like it to remain peaceful. Hopefully it does. And I think that the day that we're really going to have our eye on is weeks or months down the road when a decision comes down, whether or not we have peaceful responses and protests and demonstrations there. Hopefully that remains the case. But it has been pretty good out here so far. We'll see if we have any other questions. I guess I can get into another issue that is going to come up today, and that is what scenarios could possibly happen with the Supreme Court. I mean, the Supreme Court could affirm Roe versus Wade. It would disappoint a lot of this pro-life crowd and people nationwide who are hoping that abortion rights are struck down in some way. If the court upholds Roe, basically we're in status quo, which means that viability right now, basically a state would not have the right to pass a law that infringes on a woman's right to choose or to have an abortion before about 23 weeks if Roe is affirmed. The court could uphold this Mississippi law, which again bans abortions at 15 weeks. If that happens, what we would see is likely states all over the country get the green light to pass similar laws. So again, Texas, Alabama, any other state in the nation could pass a similar law that bans abortions at 15 weeks or even earlier. That is another possible outcome of this case. And again, you've got the pro-choice element of this country that sees that as a direct attack on women's rights. You also see the pro-life out here. That would be at least a partial win for them. The Supreme Court could also rule somewhere in the middle, where they could say, all right, we're going to keep Roe intact, so women do have a right to an abortion constitutionally protected in this country, but we're going to find a middle ground, and maybe the 23-week mark scales back a bit, and maybe they uphold the Mississippi law, where now states can pass laws banning abortions at 15 weeks or some other number. But there are a number of different ways the Supreme Court could approach this, and justices could decide. Ultimately, I'm not going to get into the game of guessing what the court will do, but that is certainly one or two of the options that they have as they rule on these cases, because that's what we've seen in the past on certain issues. They are able to say certain parts of laws they can maintain, and they can rule in a way where states have the option to sort of change their laws or get creative in response to Supreme Court decisions. So I think we're about to wrap up at this point. If you have any other questions and we haven't gotten to them, you can leave them in there. I can't promise you, because I'm going to be monitoring the Supreme Court case, but we can try maybe to get back and answer some questions later on. So if you have one, we haven't gotten to it yet, we're not live, still write it, comment, like our page, by the way, and if you can, share whatever NewsNation, our coverage of this, because I'm obviously biased in this way, but I think we're doing a good, fair, objective job of covering this story, which is clearly one that elicits a lot of emotion. We're going to wrap it up, but I'll just leave you, if our photographer Cameron can pan ahead, and you can